What I'd like to talk to you about today is the regulatory background of usability engineering. That's what you probably want to know most about. So do you have to do it? Where is it regulated? And why do you need to do it? And then we are talking about relevance of the usability engineering process shortly. And I'm going to introduce you to the usability engineering process, which can be applied to be sure to meet all the regulatory requirements. Let's start directly with the regulatory background. So, as you probably all know, medical devices are approved market and country specific. But in general, for the EU, you do have the EU law with regulations and directives. The new MDR is a regulation, which therefore has to be applied by each and every country and each and every manufacturer who's going to the EU. Additionally, you do have the national law below that. So there you have the laws and the national regulation and the statutes. So it can be that there are additional laws if you want to go to specific countries, which are coming on top of the regulation, which is applicable for whole Europe. You do have harmonized standards normally to help you to meet the EU law and help you as a manufacturer to get your product to a CE mark. Below that, you have, for instance, technical regulations, which are explaining stuff a little bit better and help you to understand what is required. For our case, when we're talking about usability engineering, this is directly coming with the requirements of the medical device regulation, or depending on what kind of products you're doing, even the in vitro diagnostic regulation. And the standard, which is translating the requirements to you as a manufacturer, is the IEC 62366-1 in the newest version 2021. So it's called the Application of Usability Engineering to Medical Devices. This is the standard which is applicable even for the IVDs or IVDRs, because there is no single IVDR standard at the moment. As you probably know, there is a shortage on harmonized standard at the moment. So there are quite a lot of common standards, but the number of already harmonized standards according to the MDR is quite restricted. For the usability engineering sector, this is especially interesting because the former regulations, so the 62366 from 2007, was harmonized. But because it's not up to date and it's not the best version, it was withdrawn, and no new regulation is harmonized today. But in contact with all the notified bodies, this is the regulation you have to look at. Some examples. It is requested that you do a reduction of the risk due to ergonomic features of the product. So ergonomics is all about the sizes, the shapes, the weights, how you build the product, how you design the product in terms of how it can be used by the later users. This is done or named very explicitly because the MDR requests you to consider the skills and capacities of your users. By now, that's been done on a very simple basis until the MDD. So you could say, oh, we have healthcare professionals, so there's not a problem at all. They know what to do. By now, this is not working anymore. So you have to be much more precise about what are the capacities, what are the skills, what is that you can really expect from your user group. Next thing is if you're working with products that are for lay users, you need to make sure that lay users may use your product safely and free of use errors. So that really means you have to show that this is done properly and that somebody who is a lay user is able to do that and use your product. Or one step further, you have to show that your IFU, so the instructions that you have, your labeling, your safety advices, that they are appropriate for the user groups that you've chosen. And I think one of the very relevant aspects is the definitions aspect, which is named in the MDR. And what they say is that depending on the circumstances and everything that you've done so far, a product flaw, a use error, which is reported, can be seen as a product flaw. So now we are into the question of who is paying money for problems and what is considered as a product flaw. And actually, if you can't show that you followed your usability process, or that you followed a usability process, there can be problems afterwards, because they say depending on your work as a manufacturer, a use error can be a product flaw. So it's really important to make sure that you can show your efforts in usability engineering. And I'm quite sure that you, as every manufacturer I've met and I've worked with, have a high interest in bringing the best product to the market, and you're investing a lot in making sure that your product is working properly. The thing that we often see is that a lot of time and efforts go into the design of the product, but a lot less time and efforts go into the documentation of what you've done in regards to usability engineering. And that wasn't a problem until the new MDR. By now it is. So therefore, I'm going to show you what you need to do and what you need to document for it. But let me give you one additional motivation for caring about usability. I brought you some German numbers. German just because those were the ones that I could find quite easily. So we do have, like every country, the need to collect all the incident reports. And having a look at the last 15 years almost, what you can see is a continuous increase of the incident reports in the area of medical devices. So there are more use errors, there are more problems, there are more hazards, there are more harms which are coming from medical devices during the last 15 years. To give you an impression, I can't find the numbers for this year because it's still going, but if you compared the numbers from 2008 to the numbers from 2021, the number of reports increased sevenfold. So 7 times the number of reports 15 years ago. So this is like a huge increase in incident reports. In 2017, there was a quite detailed analysis of the incidents, and more than 20% of their then reported incidents, so more than 3,000 cases, were related to a lack of training or use errors as a cause of the incident. So more than 20% were usability related. This is one of the causes why the importance of usability is increasing, especially because the number of lay user products, the number of digital products in the medical sector is increasing also. And I found some more details and some more numbers. If you have a look at the operation room products, so everything that is used in a surgical setting, 40% of all the incidents are usability related, so even more. And this is a quite critical situation, which is shown by the results of that. You have 1/3 of the patients which were involved in this incident that needed intensive critical care afterwards. So as you can see, usability is not just a part that you have to document because somebody asked you to do, but it's also something that really leads to intensive injuries, to really big harms on the patient side by now. So I've been talking a lot, and I mean really a lot, about usability until now. And therefore, I like to step one step back and go to the basics. So what is usability? I brought you some definitions. If you Google usability, you will find this This is like the international agreed upon definition of usability. Usability is a characteristic of the user interface, so only the parts that the user is going to interact with, that facilitates use and thereby establishes effectiveness, efficiency, and user satisfaction in the intended use environment. This is the definition you will find almost everywhere. And it's also the definition which is referred to from the medical standards. Some words about that. Effectiveness means if a product can do, or if a user can do with the product what he intends to do. And the second thing, efficiency, is how much effort your user needs to reach his goal. And the second thing, user satisfaction, is exactly what it sounds like. So how satisfied is he with the usage? This is the general usability definition. But if you have a closer look into the usability engineering standard, you will find this notes and this additional information. And what they say is, okay, so all the aspects of usability, including the effectiveness, efficiency, and user satisfaction, can either increase or decrease safety. So you see, they noticed that it's about effectiveness, efficiency, and user satisfaction. But for the usability of medical devices, we are talking about all the aspects that are related to safety. So usability in general includes attributes such as user satisfactions and aesthetics of the medical device that are not directly related to the safety of a medical device, and as a result are not considered by this standard. About usability engineering for medical devices, it's not the same as usability engineering for every other area that you're working in, and it's all about safety. Therefore, let's have a look at the question how you're doing usability engineering according to the standard. So this is the picture that you will see in the standard if you have it or if you know it. And as you can see, this picture is huge. So there is a huge amount of different steps that you have to consider to do usability engineering. Don't worry. The first good thing to know is it's not all about usability engineering, but actually the left side of the picture is from the risk management standard. So, and only the right side in the picture is from usability engineering. So what they do is, within the standard, they depict the usability engineering standard together with the risk management standard. And as you can see, there are a lot of connections between both sides, which leads me to the finding 2, that the usability engineering and risk management are highly related within the medical device development. So basically, for usability engineering of medical devices, it's all about risks. You're doing usability engineering to ensure that you are able to show that the use of your medical device does not lead to any unacceptable risk. And to ensure that, you have about 10 steps to make sure that this is the case. So let me walk you step by step through the process. The first things that you're doing is you think about the question, what are your users like? So what is the environment your product is going to be used? What are the capacities and skills of your user, which is directly related to the requirements from the MDR. If you think back to what I told you, where they say you need to make sure that your product considers the capacities and the skills, this is where you show that you've done that. So you're going to write a use specification. Short explanation, the step here is the questions that you're trying to solve in this step. Down here, beneath the arrow, you see the document that you're going to write. So out of the first step, the very first thing that you do is you are going to prepare your use specification. In your use specification, there are a lot of different additional information, like, for instance, your intended use of the medical device or the operating principle of your medical device. I do not focus on these just because coming from your background and your knowledge, I'm quite sure that you will have a lot of documents which are considering those appropriately. So my recommendation for you, don't write it again, don't double your information, just link to the existing documents that you already do have and add the information which is missing here. In the second step, or actually those are the steps 2, 3, and 4 of the standard. I've just summed them up because they are all about safety and risk management. So you basically think about what can go wrong with regards to the safety and the user interface with your medical device. You start by identifying user interface characteristics related to safety and potential use errors. You thereby look into existing sources. If you have existing devices, you look into your post-market surveillance data. You can use the questions from the annex of the risk management standard to identify the characteristics. But you have to go through always with the focus of the user interface. So it's not the technical aspects like radiation, but it's more the question of how does the user interact with the device and what are the risks that are coming from this interaction. Afterwards, you're going into the identification of known and foreseeable hazards and hazardous situations. And in the last step, when you're looking at risk, you're going to identify and describe hazard-related use scenarios. So as you can imagine, this is something that you're doing not alone as a usability engineer, but instead you're doing this normally together with the risk management team, often with the product managers or the product owner, depending on how you call it in your company. This is a joint teamwork. If you're going for the FDA, so today is focus EU, but if you're going for the FDA also, you will have to write down some additional documents here. For instance, you will have to do a user-related risk analysis, which is one of the basic documents that you need to go to the US market. In the next steps, you think about which of those things, so all the hazards that you identify and hazard-related use scenarios, you are going to evaluate in the end to show that your medical device is safe and free of unacceptable risk. Those are the scenarios that you have to include in your summative evaluation in the end. You can make appropriate hazard-related use scenarios by 3 means. The first, and probably the easiest version for rational, is you can just select every hazard-related use scenario, and you can test every hazard-related use scenario that you identified. The second version is you have to select them, or you have to write a rational and select those hazard-related use scenarios based on the severity of the potential harm. And the third selection scheme is you can select the hazard-related use scenarios based on the severity of the potential harm and certain circumstances related to the medical device and the manufacturer. Basically, that means you can do everything. The most important thing in this step is if you're not going for you're testing each and every scenario, but instead you're making a selection, which is a step that makes totally sense. You need to have a proper rationale, and you have to write down why you decided to go for those scenarios and not for the others. So that's more about discussing or making a written discussion with your notified body and make sure that everybody's on the same side and understand what you're talking about. After you've done all this, you're thinking about the requirements on the user interface. So basically, now you know what is risky. Now you know potential hazards and harms, and you know your user group. So you start to think about how can you do a proper risk mitigation? How does my device or what kind of requirements do I have for my user interface to make sure that we are serving the right user group, that we're fulfilling the right purpose without posing any additional risk? And we're now in step 6. And now in step 7 of the whole process, you are starting the design of your product. You haven't started the design formally according to the usability engineering process until now. Besides, you're not only going to design your medical device, but you were also going to do formative testing. So this is basically testing on the way to the development of your design, where you're going to figure out whether your design is on the right track and you don't pose any additional hazards or you don't have any usage problems at all. Formative testing, just to make it very clear, is not required. It's not a mandatory step in the process unless you have decided to integrate formative testing into your own usability SOPs, so your standard procedures internally. If you've written down we are doing formative testing, for sure, your notified body will have a look at your formative testing. If you haven't included it, but you're just saying we're doing the design and then we are going to do the summative evaluation, everything's fine. Nobody's going to ask for it. Just one word of caution. As I told you in the beginning, I'm doing usability testing since almost 20 years now. And to be honest, I have never ever seen a user test of a product run smoothly for the first time. So if you haven't tested your product during development with users, I am almost 100% sure that your summative evaluation will not work the way you expect it to. So therefore, if you have the time and you're developing something new, invest some time into formative testing just to make sure that everything's on the right track. Therefore, this step is an iterative step. So you're going to design something, then you're going to test it with the users. Depending on the outcome, you're going to redesign some things, you're going to retest it, and so on. So that really depends on your first guess, the quality of your first guess, the quality of your knowledge upfront, how tight or how close you are with the user group, and how much knowledge you've already gathered during the years. If you're totally new and you're designing a totally new product, probably even one where there's no preceding device on the market or no predicate device in any version, I would guess that you at least need 3 to 5 iterations to make sure that you're on the right track. For an existing device or for just slightly adaptations, you can even go with one or no formative evaluations at all. So, and then the next and last step of the process is the evaluation of the product at the end. That's where you conduct the summative evaluation. That's where you have your test reports and your test protocols ready. And that's where you show that you've done everything in your possibilities to ensure that the device will be safe to use. So basically, you've probably noticed, depending on the amount of required documents and information, one of the most important things to take away is that the regulatory usability engineering process creates a lot of documents. So I mean, really a lot of documents, and hopefully a safe to use device. But to be honest, it does not necessarily create an easy to use and successful medical device. This is something that you have to make sure by adding formative evaluations and improving your design. From the regulatory side of things, the last test is relevant in all the documents you saw on the slides beneath. So do a lot of writing and do final testing. I know that this sounds like quite a lot of stuff to do, and it can be. So I guess some of you are asking if there's any chance to reduce the efforts that are needed to be invested for usability engineering. And yes, the answer is yes, there is a chance to reduce it. I brought with you for you the simplified usability engineering process, which is possible to apply for existing products with a market launch before 2015. So for stock products, basically. Why the magical number 2015? That's quite simple. It's just because in 2015, the current version of the usability engineering standard was released. So the version which we are referring to, which is now in the 2021 version. So what you need to do to decide whether you're going to apply the long or the short process is you have to decide, is what you're using or what you're trying to bring to the EU, is this a stock product which has been developed before 2015? Yes or no. If you come up with the answer that it's not a stock product, or it has not been released before 2015, you have to do the whole usability engineering process, which includes all the required documentation. If you say yes, it's an old product, or we have already we published this before 2015, then you can use the simplified process. This is normally known as the UP process, so the user interface of unknown provenance process. If you hear that in the future, this process is your friend. Let's have a look at the process itself in more detail. So once again, we're here with an unchanged product. If it's unchanged, you still need to prepare your use specifications. So if you think back to the full process, this is about the user groups, the characteristics of the users, the user environments, and all the additional stuff like intended medical indication, intended patient group that you already have somewhere else. This is a document which is neat to the same extent as in the full process anyway. So you need to prepare this one independent of the question if you have a product which is unchanged since 2015. Additionally, because you say, or you can only say this product was on the market before, and I'm going to apply the UP, that means that based on the former regulations, everybody is expecting you that you do have post-production information about complaints, incidents, near incidents. So basically your post-market surveillance data of your product. If you do have post-production information, so PMS data, you need to analyze this, and you need to show that there are no use-related risks that are related to the design of your user interface. Or you at least need to analyze that and make an interpretation. But if you come up with use-related risks that are based on your user interface, you have to think about making a modification. Otherwise, your risk management has to do some really hard arguing. And if you have to make some modifications because it's based on your design, then you're back to the complete process, at least for the parts that you're going to change. So the UP process gives you the possibility to be applied not for the complete product, but for parts of the product. So imagine you do have a syringe, for instance, and you're just modifying one small part of the syringe. But the original product was released in 2010. So what you can do is you can write down your shorted version for the syringe itself. And for the parts that you're modifying, which is done at the moment for sure, because it's a new part, you have to apply the complete process, which means you have to do all the documentation. You have to define your user requirements. You have to define your hazard-related use scenarios. And you have to do some testing, which shows that there is no risk. In general, if you have an in-depth look at the standard, there is no need to do summative testing all over the place over and over again. So if you like have a product family, for instance, you can combine this. Or if you have predicate devices and you have usability testing data available, you can apply this if the products are comparable. So there are a lot of possibilities to reduce the effort for existing products. But you have to be able to provide a lot of data based on that. If you don't have it, we've had a lot of customers during the last few months and I would say the last 1.5 years that have to redo their summative testing for the new MDR, even if this is a predicate device. So, and in the end, because it's all about risk, for sure, you have to evaluate the residual risk which is coming out of the process and your user interface. One detailed checklist for you to show what documents you have to prepare for the use standard. So we already talked about the use specification. It's the same as for the usual usability engineering process. You have to do the post-production information review, everything available there, all the field reports, incident, near incidents. You still have to write down hazards and hazardous situations related to the usability. Therefore, you have to review the risk analysis of the existing product. And you have to make sure that by the time that you've done the risk analysis, you even considered all the risks that are related to the usability of the product. If they're not, you have to document them afterwards to make or to ensure that everything is included in there. Then you have to apply your risk control measures. So if you identified new hazard or hazardous situations, you need to reduce the risk to an acceptable level, or better say to as low as possible. And once again, just to make sure, if you have to change the user interface to do so, all the parts that are going to be changed are not part of the UP, and you end all the process with the residual risk evaluation. So, which is based on all the new information that you found. And you put this all in a document, which is called the usability engineering file, or you can put a lot of the information even in your risk management file and just point from the usability engineering file to that. So those are the two possibilities for you to do usability engineering for the European market. If you have a new product, you have to follow the full process. If you have an existing product, you can argument for going for the shorter process, but you need to provide some documents and some data there as well. That's the end of my presentation. Here are the contact details, but I've seen that you've posed a lot of questions, and I'm going to open them up and we'll see what are the questions, and I'll try to answer all of them. So, okay. The main differences, well, I have to look that up in detail, but in general, there are increased requirements about the documentation for the, question for everybody. What are the main differences between the IEC 62366 from 2015 and from to the IEC 62366 from 2021? So in general, the main differences are, first, we talked about the selection schemes of hazard-related use scenarios for your summative evaluation. In the 2015 versions, you had only 2 selection schemes that were possible and allowed if you're going to follow the process. The first one was select all the hazard-related use scenarios. The second one was select the hazard-related use scenarios based on the severity of the potential harm. So one thing is they've added the third possibility, which includes to consider circumstances that are very specific to your device or you as a manufacturer. So this gives you a lot more freedom and therefore opens up the room for more discussion and enables you to, let's say, be a bit more flexible with what you're going to test in the end. This is one of the major differences. A second thing is about the data that you need to document for your testing. So in the early version of the standard, you just have to talk about the methods that you're going to use for the summative testing and give some details. In the current version of the product, this is much more based on objective data, because what they've seen is a lot of persons are using like something like questionnaires to evaluate the usability of the devices. So what they do is they have a 10-point questionnaire which says like, how easy was it to use, how safe do you think, how much errors did you do? And this is not longer feasible. So you're not allowed to do a summative evaluation by just handing over a questionnaire, but instead you have to show how you're going to select the data and how you show that you're collecting objective data about the usability of the product. So it's really about observing if there are any use error are occurring, and it's not about me as a user who says this is safe and easy to use. So the quality of the testing has increased a lot, and it's getting more complex is probably not the right word, but if you ask me, it's getting more methodically sound. So it's better what you're doing, but you need to show that it's better what you're doing. And sure, one of the most occurrent changes is the reference to the risk management standard, because it references now to the new version, but I think this is just a formal thing. And it needs, and one additional change, sorry, the standard requests you to consider potential use errors in your user interface specification. So those haven't been included, or they haven't been documented before. They need to be documented now.